What we're going to talk about is the database class. Now, I've landed on the CodeIgniter database documentation, as you can see at the URL at the top. If you look on Google for just CodeIgniter database, it'll most likely bring you to this page. And what we have here are quite a few options. Most of them you're not going to use, at least in this series. You're pretty much going to be looking at the active record class right here. So the active record makes your life a lot easier than having to write SQL queries, and I'm not opposed to writing them, but this is actually, I found it very useful. This has select, insert, update, delete abilities, and all those other things like order by and the typical MySQL stuff you'll need. So the first thing we need to do is first make sure we have our database configured. So I'll open up NetBeans, and in your application config folder, the first thing we go to is database.php, and I'll scroll all the way to the bottom, and we just need to insert our settings in here. So I'm connecting to the local host. My username is root, and from our past video, our database name was junior dash. And that's all you have to do to have your settings set. But what we need to do is load the database. And we have two options to do that. We could load it manually every time, or we could have it auto-load. Now I prefer to have it auto-loaded because this is going to be a database-rich application. So in our auto-load PHP, our libraries, you see they have examples up here as well. We're going to load database. Okay? Now once you do that, you should go to your project page and refresh the page. And if you don't get any errors, it means it successfully connected to the database. Because when you auto-load it, it auto-loads with your default settings. Next, let's go to our controllers. And first I'm going to get rid of this welcome file. We're not even using this. Let's go to our home controller. And let's just create a test method. So I'll say public function test. And normally without the autoloader you would say this load library database. But strangely enough, it is this load database, like that. And when you do that, you have this available, this DB. That's if you load it manually. But I can get rid of that because we're auto-loading it. So we have this database available. It's just this DB. So I could say this DB get user. Okay. We'll start with something simple. I'll just say Q equals that, and print R of Q result. Okay. And let's go and hit our test home/test, and it says undefined property result. I had to make that a function. I forget that all the time. There we go. And it's an empty array. Okay. So briefly, I'm just going to open up my database, and in the user I'm just going to put in some junk data. Okay. And I'll refresh, and now we have all this stuff here. So let's go back. Now the way this active record works is a little bit different than you might suspect. If I wanted to do a where statement, there's two ways I can do it. The first one is this way. I can say get underscore where, and in here I can pass in either a string or an array. I prefer to do an array, so I could say user ID of 1, and if I go back to refresh the page, here's user ID 1, as you can see right here. The other way, you actually pass the parameters from the top. So I'd say this DB where, whoops, and I'll just say user ID is 2, and make sure it works. There we go, user ID of 2. So what we've done is it's actually building out a query but sometimes it's hard because we're building the query in a different direction we're used to. Because in MySQL, where is usually near the end. Additionally, you can do order by user ID descending. And again, you're used to that being at the bottom. So it's kind of like you're preparing your query string, and it's not in any particular order. It'll just build it right. So I'll refresh, and since we did a descending, we start with user ID 3 and that good stuff. So let's go ahead and open the docs again and take a look at some things. We looked at this DB get, and it does load select from my table. We'll go down a little bit ways. This DB get where, we check that one out. They also have a DB select, which we can put above our query, and let's go ahead and do that. So in our file, I'll say this DB select, and I'll select the user ID and the login. Okay. And if you're used to typing out MySQL queries, this would be select user ID login from user and order by user ID descending. This is what your actual query would look like, and you can say, wow, this is in a different order. So that's probably the main thing that's going to throw you off, that you'll have to get used to. So I'll go ahead and delete that. So let's see what happens when we run just selecting these two fields. From our previous query, we had all this, and now we can just select the user ID and the login, and it's pretty easy to do. So let's go back to the docs, and if we scroll down a ways, we have some things like min and max and average. These are things we're not really going to jump into. They also have the from, where you don't have to pass in the parameter in get. So what that would say is this DB from user So now it looks a little bit more ordered, but it's not necessary to do it this way. So it's select from user, order by, and then get would get all of this. Okay. And after you call this, you'd be perfectly fine to do a new query here, because it will just get rid of all this data that happened once you fetch it or do something with it, or insert it. No need to worry about that. Back to this, they have joins, which we'll eventually use. The where, we just looked at that already. And a ways down, or where, and there's a bunch of conditions, so you don't have to type out your queries. The page is pretty long. We're not going to cover everything here, but you should be able to get the idea of it. Again, with inserting data, it's kind of the same thing. It's incredibly easy. We'll do an insert real quick. So I'll just make a new one. I'll say this DB insert data, and I want to insert into the user table, let's say. Heck, we don't even have to pre-fill an array, we'll just write it in here. And I'll say login equals Jenkins, like that. And if we refresh the page and look at our database, we have Jenkins. Super easy to insert data. Update is also pretty much the same thing. If we go to the update area, I'll go back, update. We just have to pass in a where statement. So just like that insert statement, we can do an update, we just pass a where. So let's go ahead and do that. I would say this DB update. And whatever you want to update it with, I'm going to change the login to Sammy. And I need to set the where statement, otherwise it's going to update every record. So this DB where user ID equals 4. Okay. And let me make sure I have 4. 4 was Jenkins, which we just created. And I'll refresh the page. We'll look at this, refresh, and there it is, Sammy. And it's pretty much the same thing for deleting. I'll show you that also. To delete, we just say delete from my table, and the where statement is built in right into it. Otherwise, we can do it this way as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's my where statement. I'll say this db delete from user. Okay. Now, this is a dangerous way to do it because it looks like it's deleting everything from user. If this were ever to get commented out, it would delete every user. But I'll show you anyway. So I'll refresh. Go to here and refresh. Sammy is gone. They also allow you to just pop this guy on the end, like so. And let's delete user ID 3. Refresh. And back here, let's refresh. And there it is. Let me make sure to comment out this code. Okay. And let's hit up the docs once more. They have method chaining here. This is optional. I really don't do this very often, if at all, but you can optionally build out your query like this rather than ending them on a new line. And basically that in action is kind of like this. So you don't have to type this DB out every time. Okay. It would look like this, but we could make it look a little more readable on one line, like this. Let's tab it over a little ways. There we go. This is method chaining. So I'll refresh, and I still get my objects there. So that's the general stuff we're going to need for our models. And I was demonstrating this in the controller. This code should be in the models, and we're going to get to that, but this was kind of a run through of the database class. And I'm going to comment all this out so that we never look on it again. And that'll wrap up this video.